Imagine it's dusk in a prehistoric forest. The fire crackles faintly, barely holding back the darkness. You huddle close to your clan because out here, every rustle in the bushes might be a predator, or worse, another tribe. What was it like to live every moment with your instincts dialed to survival mode? Tonight, we'll step back into that ancient reality, where cleverness and community were your only tools in a hostile world. How did early humans find safety in such chaos? Let's uncover their quiet triumphs together. You open your eyes to the damp, heavy air clinging to the jagged walls. The cave smells exactly how you'd imagine a mix of animals, smoke, and damp earth. Beneath you, a stretched piece of animal hide barely softens the hard ground, and your skin feels the morning chill creeping through like an unwelcome stranger. There's no mattress to sink into, no warm blanket to pull over your head, just the layered pieces of fur, and your own resolve to push through another day. And the rocks? They seem to have an uncanny talent for digging into your ribs no matter how you position yourself. But complaining? That isn't an option, especially when the whole clan is stirring, each as stiff and cold as you are. This is life unforgiving, immediate, and waiting for no one. The morning sun doesn't greet you kindly. It filters hesitantly through the mouth of the cave, illuminating scattered remains of last night's meal. A pile of brittle bones lies off to the side, stripped clean but attracting the persistent interest of scavengers. Birds squawk somewhere outside, their calls sharp, almost warning of something unseen. Meanwhile, hunger gnaws at your stomach because last night's meal, a lean piece of roasted meat shared among too many mouths, barely made a dent in the constant emptiness you've felt. But before you can even think about food, there's a more urgent problem: the fire. The flames are down to barely a whisper. At best, a smouldering cluster of embers struggles to stay alive in the crude fire pit someone built with stones and packed dirt. Overnight, you can imagine it fading hungry, just like you. But a dead fire isn't just annoying, it's a looming threat. Without fire, warmth vanishes quickly, and darkness doesn't just feel like an absence of light. It feels like something alive, wrapping itself around you. Worse, it means predators lurking outside, still unsure about approaching, might grow bold. A cave is only as safe as the fire guarding it. Gathering around the waning embers, someone takes charge. You pick up flint stones, their cold weight familiar in your hands, and the soft grumble of dried grass is tugged close. And then begins a task so deceptively simple, most modern humans couldn't fathom its difficulty. You strike the stones sharply, flint meeting flint, sending a faint spark over the kindling material. It's a careful rhythm that ancient hands learned well, a skill honed and repeated until even the clan's youngest grew capable. Archaeologists have found ancient fire-starting kits, tools of flint sharpened just right, mixed with materials like pyrite or dried fungus. These objects weren't just tools, they were lifelines, as essential as the food you struggled to find each day. The sparks leap closer to the dried grass, but still, there's no flame. Someone offers advice, probably the old one, always muttering things that sound like wisdom. Breathe softly, they say, or a version of it in their language, which isn't quite words, but the low, guttural sound of instincts passed between generations. You lean down until you're practically nose to nose with death in disguise, exhaling tiny breaths like coaxing an infant to wake. Then it happens, a flicker, an orange glow that almost feels miraculous in its brightness, rising against the dull, colourless morning. The relief is palpable. In that moment, the fire doesn't just bring warmth, it banishes things. The invisible weight of the nightly threats, predators, rival clans, even the wrath of the cold is lifted, just a little. Watching the flames catch and curl into a blaze seems to relax every muscle. The group sits back, almost together in exhale. The flicker of firelight against the cave wall transforms the space. Shadows dance across stone carvings, forgotten moments of idle hands scratching symbols onto rock, some of which archaeologists still marvel over today. But back then, sure, they were art or storytelling or maybe just boredom, but none of that mattered as much as this. The flames had returned. The world had momentarily been made safe. There's satisfaction in the little rituals of fire-making. Knowledge is passed hand to hand through repetition and necessity. To the modern mind, fire feels like an invention too old to shake our imagination, but early humans didn't see it as obvious or guaranteed. It wasn't just survival, it was a triumph over nature's dominion. The mornings when it refused to catch? You can imagine the panic nipping at their heels. Without that warm barrier glowing behind you, no one would rest easy. Problem solving wasn't an intellectual exercise. It was adrenaline fueled and dictated by stakes, life or death, warmth or cold. But today, you've done it. You've won this tiny battle, and the day feels like it can officially begin. The fire becomes a magnet. Members of the group gather closer, rubbing stiff hands together, positioning themselves to soak in the heat. Conversation, if you could call it that, springs up in bursts of primitive noises and gestures. There's laughter here too rough and abrupt, but genuine. For a moment it almost feels like relief is allowed. Yet, the moment doesn't last long. The heat revives the discomfort in your empty stomach. It grips you tighter now, gnawing at your focus. Beside you, others exchange glances, time to hunt, to forage, to leave the fleeting safety of this damp stone shelter in hopes of finding sustenance. The morning fire gives you one last gift before that journey, a sense of security as you leave the most vulnerable members of the clan behind in its protection. Because out there, beyond the rocky walls of your temporary home, things will only get harder. But at least for now, ashes warm your hands as you prepare to face what's next. Breakfast. It isn't waiting on a table, steaming and ready to brighten your morning. There's no fruit bowl, no sizzling bacon, no coffee filtering through the air. Instead, breakfast is out there hiding, sprinting, scampering, or dangling just out of reach. Your day's first meal depends entirely on your ability to catch it, find it, or fight for it. And whatever you do, you have to find something fast. Because out here in the prehistoric world, there's no concept of 3 meals a day. There's just eating or not. You step out of the cave into a world ruled by hunger. The muscles in your arms feel weak, your belly aches, and a dull headache pokes behind your eyes. These are the signs that your body is running low on fuel. You're not the only one either. Everyone around you, from the oldest member of the clan to the youngest toddler, knows the stakes. This is survival stripped down to its most basic terms. Calories in versus calories out. And the cruel irony? Just trying to get those calories often burns far more energy than you can afford to lose. Finding food isn't as simple as looking for something edible. Foraging seems like the easy option, but even that's more complicated than it sounds. Picture yourself scanning the area for berries, roots, or nuts. You spot some fruits hanging from a bush and wonder, are they safe? One bad mistake, a poisonous plant, a toxic mushroom, and the consequences can be swift and unforgiving. You don't just get sick, you become a liability. Out here, even minor sicknesses can weaken the group, and a weakened group is as good as a target. So foraging is less about blind luck and more about knowledge passed down, knowing which plants won't kill you and how to find the ones that will actually provide value. Of course, plants alone rarely cut it. Most of the time, breakfast means hunting. That's where the real risk comes in. Tracking animals requires sharp eyes and keen awareness. Your group spreads out, moving carefully through the underbrush, searching for footprints, broken branches, or fresh scat. Each sign is a clue, guiding you towards something bigger, something meatier, a wild boar, a gazelle, maybe even a bird or a hare, all of which are well aware that staying alive means staying hidden. The tools you carry are rudimentary but effective. A spear is your best bet. Its wooden shaft worked smooth through endless hours of carving, and its flint head sharp enough to pierce flesh. Archaeologists have uncovered weapons like this in caves and burial sites, hints of early ingenuity that turned raw materials into tools of survival. A hand axe, chipped meticulously from stone, isn't just a blade. It's an extension of your own hands, able to cut, carve, and, if things go bad, defend. Boomerangs. Yes, boomerangs and early throwing sticks were even used in some regions, lightweight but capable of stunning small game from a distance. But the most important weapon you have? Each other. A lone hunter stands little chance. A group, though. A group can take down prey much larger than any single human. Take a moment to imagine the process. It's not like the flash of drama you see in movies, spears thrown perfectly, prey falling instantly. No, this requires stalking, patience, coordination. Someone creeps closer with a spear, poised and ready. Another keeps a lookout, waiting to signal if the prey moves. If the spears fail, a chase might follow, exhausting prey until it collapses. And if that animal doesn't drop quickly, a wounded beast can turn dangerous in an instant. Its thrashing hooves or sharp tusks a reminder that not every battle ends in your favor. But even then, success isn't guaranteed. One misstep, a rustling of leaves, an errant movement, and the prey bolts. Hours wasted, energy spent, and your stomach emptier than before. Failure doesn't just sting, It spirals. Without food, focus slips. Weakness creeps in. Tomorrow's hunt becomes harder, less coordinated, less likely to succeed. Yet, humans are nothing if not adaptable. Because on the days when the hunt fails, you can imagine the group falling back on other strategies. In some regions, scavenging might offer a grim opportunity. Spotting the remains of another predator's kill, a lion's leftovers, for example, you have a choice to make. Is it worth the gamble? If you're lucky, you'll strip away enough meat from the carcass to carry back to the group without attracting attention. If you're unlucky, the original predator or another one might come for you. And then, there are the simpler solutions, though they rarely fill the belly in the same satisfying way. Insects, for instance, are reliable if unappetizing. Early humans likely plucked fat grubs from tree bark or dug under rocks for beetles. Protein is protein, after all, and desperate times erase the line between gourmet and grotesque. Archaeological digs have even turned up evidence of cracked bones, proof that marrow, the rich, fatty tissue inside, was prized as a valuable source of nutrition. But let's say today ends differently. Let's say the group's persistence pays off. A boar, cornered in a dense thicket, falls under a barrage of spears. The relief is immediate, visceral. The predator-prey dynamic has flipped, and for a moment, you are the victor. The successful hunters strip the animal quickly, hauling back pounds of meat. The clan gathers around the fire to roast the flesh, while others tend to the byproducts, using every part of the animal, from sinew for ropes to its bones, for sharpening into needles or tools. The meat sizzles as fat drips into the flames, the smell filling the air. For the first time today, people are genuinely smiling. The atmosphere shifts. What was tension just hours ago becomes something lighter, a chance to share stories or simply enjoy the comfort of survival. A successful hunt isn't just about nourishment, it's about bonding. Whether it's through sharing bites of meat or laughing at a comically bad spear throw someone made earlier in the day, the shared experience strengthens the clan. You can almost hear the laughter echoing into the night, a sound as human as firelight. Food offers more than calories. It's stability and strength, a promise that tomorrow's hunt might feel a little easier. And so, sitting by the fire, stomach full for the first time in days, you let that promise hang in the air just a little longer. You think about how different the day might have gone if the last spear missed its mark. The gnawing uncertainty of the next meal always lingers, reminding you that success today does not guarantee safety tomorrow. As the group eventually scatters, the leftovers are carefully rationed and packed for those too frail to hunt, or for days when luck runs dry. With the embers still glowing behind you, it's hard not to glance toward the horizon and wonder what's coming next. The hunt might be over, but the work of survival doesn't end. This much is certain. You can't linger outside the cave for too long, not with the predators that roam the night, watching closely for any sign of weakness. So, back inside the shelter you go, clutching scraps of cooked meat or a sharpened piece of bone as you prepare for whatever the next challenge might be. Meals may satisfy hunger, but they also remind you of something more important, why staying safe and secure while resting matters just as much as the hunt itself. And as you retreat to the fire-lit safety of stone walls and shared warmth, the next question becomes clear. Where will you sleep when danger always lurks just outside? Imagine closing your eyes at the end of a long, exhausting day, knowing full well that closing them might be the most dangerous thing you do. Falling asleep wasn't the peaceful retreat it is today, it was a calculated risk. You'd be doing it with one ear tuned to every snap of a twig or distant growl. Because out here, in the prehistoric wilderness, the night didn't belong to you. It belonged to the predators, the prowlers, the things that came alive under the cover of darkness. Sleep, though necessary, was something you did carefully, and often with one eye slightly open. Now, let's talk about where you're trying to sleep. If you think the term home conjures images of cozy warmth and security, forget it. A home in this world was wherever you could wedge yourself. The most logical choice for many was the Cavenature's ready-made shelter. A good cave had to tick a whole mental checklist, though, deep enough to keep out the weather, narrow enough to make it hard for predators to squeeze in, and this was critical not already occupied. A bear? A pack of wolves? They liked caves too, and let's just say they weren't the best roommates. But not everyone had access to caves, and when the geography didn't provide, early humans had to get creative. They built makeshift shelters using whatever materials they could find. Fallen branches, animal hides, and stones became the building blocks for huts, a quick construction thrown together when the clan had to settle in a less-than-ideal location. These weren't exactly luxury accommodations. The roofs leaked when it rained, drafts pierced through gaps in the walls, and more than likely, the thing you were sleeping on the night before might still smell faintly of whatever animal it came from alive and kicking just days earlier. Even so, shelters weren't just about comfort. Honestly, comfort wasn't really in the cards. They were chosen carefully, almost militaristically. Safety sat at the heart of every decision. A good location would be slightly elevated, with a clear view of the surrounding area, because let's face it, knowing what's coming before it arrives feels a lot better than not knowing. Proximity to water also mattered, but not too close. Rivers and streams, as valuable as they were, attracted predators too. Sometimes, clans would settle closer to clusters of trees, which offered both material to build with and cover to hide in. In some ways, the landscape decided for you, but even the safest locations couldn't erase the threats that hung over every night. Predators were a constant and, not just the four-legged kind. Rival clans brought danger too, especially during times when food and resources were scarce. Archaeological evidence points to these clashes. Blunt trauma wounds on skeletal remains suggest humans weren't above attacking one another for territory or supplies. At night, keeping the fire burning wasn't just practical, it was survival strategy 101. A brightly glowing fire pit sent a message. This spot is taken, and the group here knows how to defend it. Speaking of fire, it wasn't just a deterrent for threats outside the shelter. Inside, it was life itself. Think of a cold night without insulation, the wind howling through every crack in the structure. A roaring fire in the middle of the shelter wasn't just convenient, it was transformative. It turned a haphazard pile of hides and branches into something that felt almost secure. Fire gave heat, light, and a sense of shared safety. Think about it. A fire glows. It sparks against the walls and flickers on the faces around it. It must have felt like a shield, thin as it was, between humanity and everything outside the reach of those flames. Of course, we can learn a lot from what these shelters left behind if you know where to look. Archaeological digs have uncovered evidence of life within the caves themselves. Those famous prehistoric paintings, they're more than just art blown stickily across a wall with red ochre and other natural pigments. They're proof that these spaces weren't just shelters, they were lived-in homes where early humans thought, felt, and expressed themselves. Imagine tending a fire while someone beside you paints the stories of your most recent hunt, the animals you've seen, or even the strange shapes and patterns swimming in their mind. The walls weren't just rock, they were canvases that told the tales of survival. Grinding stones, spear fragments, and crude bone tools have turned up in cave systems all over the world. These give archaeologists a pretty vivid picture of what life inside them looked like, but it wasn't always cozy. Evidence shows that many caves had layers of burnt remains, suggesting fires weren't just for warmth and light, but for clearing out the less friendly residents' poisonous insects, for instance. And let's not romanticize it too much. Caves, no matter how impressive they seem, still came with plenty of hazards. Cold drafts sucked away precious heat, slippery stones turned sharply uneven, and the darkness always felt like it was swallowing something. So how did early humans make it bearable? Strategy, and lots of it. Imagine a clan arranging themselves like a well-oiled machine. The strongest and most alert members of the group positioned themselves closer to the entrance. They might have kept spears at the ready, poised for any sign of movement. Those who needed more protection, injured, elderly, or very young, were tucked farther back, right where the fire's warmth pooled most. This wasn't arbitrary, it was survival coordination. Every person had a place, and that arrangement offered protection to them all. When it came to staying warm, the strategies bordered on ingenious. Animal hides lined floors and walls, providing insulation and softening the otherwise unrelenting stone. Some shelters may have used overlapping layers of these hides as curtains, hanging at cave entrances to trap heat further and keep drafts at bay. So, yes, it's safe to say your average caveman understood how to use their limited resources better than we often give them credit for. And let's not ignore the psychological gift of living in groups like this. For all the constant threats that made sleep such a dicey prospect, being surrounded by others sharing the sounds of them breathing, shifting, and existing must have helped ease the weight of vulnerability. Being alone? That was a death sentence. But in a group, with carefully orchestrated sleeping and watch cycles, you could close your eyes and maybe just maybe trust that someone else was awake, keeping a lookout on your behalf. At the core of all this was a powerful instinct to adapt. If the fire was too small, they found more fuel. If the hides weren't thick enough, they layered them more carefully. If a predator came close, they piled up stones for barriers or moved the camp entirely. Early humans weren't just survivors, they were planners, improvisers, and builders. And it's with this adaptability in mind that we shift focus. Because these shelters and camps didn't just happen, they required tools, ingenuity, and experimentation. Staying protected meant the development of a new kind of creativity, the ability to reshape the natural world into something useful. What tools made it all possible? How did humanity move from simply finding to actively creating shelter? It's time to look into the ingenious first toolbox that kept these early shelters standing, or, sometimes, put them upright in the first place. Imagine holding a rock and thinking, what if this could be more? That's the kind of thought that separates humans from every other creature on the planet. Where others just used the natural world as it was, early humans had the audacity to reshape it, turning rough stones into tools, tools into survival, and survival into progress. And here comes the twist. They weren't given blueprints, no step-by-step guide, no YouTube tutorials. Every single tool they made, it started with an idea, a guess, maybe even a moment of desperation. Creating the very first tools wasn't just resourceful, it was genius. When we talk about tools, we're not just talking about convenience. For cavemen, tools were essential. They weren't optional add-ons to life, and they definitely weren't nice to have. Without tools, you didn't eat, you didn't defend yourself, you didn't build shelter, you didn't survive. That sharp edge on a piece of flint wasn't just there to make life easier, it turned a raw, unforgiving world into something you could actively shape. You might not realize it, but that small piece of chipped stone, it carried the seeds of everything we've built since. But let's be clear, crafting tools wasn't some casual activity. You didn't just stumble across a perfectly shaped spearhead lying around, glinting in the sunlight. You had to make them from scratch using your bare hands, your wits, and whatever the environment provided. Stones, sticks, bone saw materials that seem useless now, but back then were lifesavers. Imagine the absolute patience it took to chip away at a chunk of stone for hours, trying to strike just the right angle to create a cutting edge. Too little force, and nothing happens. Too much, and the whole thing cracks into worthless shards. You'd be crouched there with sweat rolling down your forehead, trying again and again, until bam, a sharp edge appeared. One of the earliest tools, a hand axe, was a game changer. It was basically the prehistoric Swiss army knife. Archaeologists have found them scattered across the world in places like Africa, Asia, and Europe, proof that this tool wasn't just useful, it was universal. Made by flaking large pieces of rock into a teardrop shape, hand axes gave humans a cutting tool that could get the job done, whether you were slicing meat, cracking open bones to suck out the nutritious marrow, or chopping down small trees for wood. It was multifunctional, in the most essential way possible. Another staple was the scraper. Think of it as the caveman version of sandpaper, used to clean animal hides and make them usable for clothes, bedding, or even shelter coverings. Without it, those hides would be stiff and impossible to work with. The process was meticulous. You'd hold the blunt end and use the sharp edge to scrape away fat and fur, leaving only smooth, pliable material. Over time, tools like these became refined small adjustments, made them easier to handle and more efficient. The first signs of innovation weren't skyscrapers or wheelbarrows. They were these tiny, practical tweaks that helped someone scrape faster or cut better. That was progress. And then there were the flint knives. Made by shaping flinter brittle, glassy rock into razor-sharp blades, these were the closest thing prehistoric humans had to precision instruments. They were smaller and easier to carry than hand axes, but deadly sharp. Flint wasn't just chosen randomly. It's one of those materials that fractures predictably, meaning you could work it again and again to get the exact shape or edge you needed. If you've ever seen a flint knife up close, with its thin, jagged edge that glints in the light, you'd know just how remarkable it was for its time. Bones and antlers didn't go to waste either. Once the meat was stripped clean, those leftover scraps of skeleton were repurposed into a whole new set of tools. Needles and awls, for example, were created this way. An awl was essentially a pointed bone tool used to punch holes in leather, crucial for sewing hides together into basic clothing or shelter material. Imagine the hours spent threading a strip of sinew through those holes, carefully binding pieces together while your fingers cramped from the cold. These tools came from necessity, yes, but they also show just how far early humans were thinking ahead. Archaeological digs have given us a clearer picture of this tool-making journey. Sites around the globe reveal not just the tools themselves, but the debris left behind, piles of shards and flakes that tell the story of trial and error. Some of the oldest tools, dating back to over 2 million years ago, come from what's now the Great Rift Valley in Africa. These stone tools, part of what's known as the Oldowan industry, were rudimentary but functional, just a chunk of stone chipped at one end to create a sharp edge. Later, the tools of the Acheulean period took things to the next level, with hand axes that were carefully shaped and symmetrical early evidence of humans not just making tools that worked, but tools that looked intentional, even polished. Now, let's talk materials. Stone was the backbone of the caveman toolbox, particularly flint and obsidian. Both of these materials could be chipped into fine, sharp edges, but they came with a learning curve. One wrong swing of the Hammerstonia blunt rock used to shape the tool and you'd ruin hours of work. Wood also played a quiet, crucial role. It was used for spear shafts, handles, and in some cases, even as a tool in itself for digging or smashing. If you were lucky enough to find trees with the right kind of hardwood, you'd carefully carve and smooth it, creating something straight and perfectly balanced. Then there were the adhesives. If you broke a hand axe or needed to attach a flint blade to a wooden handle, you had to improvise. Early humans learned how to create natural glues using tree resin mixed with ash, a concoction that could bind a tool back together. It's a detail you might overlook, but think about it. Without adhesives, multi-piece tools wouldn't have been possible. The fact that they discovered this process at all is nothing short of astonishing. And here's where things get even more interesting. These tools didn't just appear and stay the same forever. They evolved. Take spears, for example. At first, they were literally just pointed sticks. But eventually, humans started attaching stone tips to them, creating weapons that could penetrate deeper and kill more efficiently. Later still, some groups figured out how to create throwing spears, giving hunters the ability to attack prey from a distance without risking close-range combat. Every advancement meant a better chance at survival, and more importantly, fewer injuries during the hunt. This evolution wasn't unique to spear tips. Over time, as humans migrated and adapted to new environments, their tools changed and diversified. People in colder climates might create more specialized tools for scraping hides or cutting ice, while those in woodlands focused on tools for climbing trees or harvesting fruit. It's this adaptability that set early humans apart, the ability to take what worked and refine it, again and again, until the tools weren't just functional but efficient. And what did all this mean for daily life? In short, the tools these early humans made transformed their routines from constant struggles into something almost manageable. With scrapers and awls, preparing hides for shelter and clothing became faster and more effective. With flint knives and hand axes, hunting and butchering animals became less wasteful. Each tool chipped away, quite literally, at the overwhelming difficulty of survival, creating a world where you weren't just reacting to nature, you were starting to control bits of it. The first human tools were the quiet beginning of something bigger, a turning point in the story of survival. They remind us that even the smallest steps a sharper stone, a straighter stick paved the way for advancements that we now take for granted. And as you set down that flint knife or hammerstone, after carving or cutting or cracking, the next challenge is already looming. Survival doesn't take breaks, and there's one thing you can't live long without: water. How did they find it? Better yet, how did they make sure it was safe when every sip could be a gamble? Let's dig into that next. Water wasn't just a necessity, it ruled everything. Every decision, every movement, every plan your clan made could come back to one question: where will we find water? Without it, survival was impossible. And back then, locating clean, drinkable water wasn't as easy as turning a tap or grabbing a bottle. It was a scavenger hunt played across unforgiving landscapes, where the stakes were higher than life or death, they were day to day. The best case scenario? You lived near a reliable water source like a river or stream. Settling close to moving water meant you'd have a constant, fresh supply, likely clearer than stagnant pools. Still, even rivers brought their own problems. Animals shared that same water, drinking, bathing, and, well, doing other things, so contamination was a real issue. The water could carry bacteria, parasites, or even venom from dead creatures upstream. But at the brink of thirst, you couldn't exactly afford to be picky. People likely made these calculations every time they cupped their hands and dipped into a stream. Am I drinking life, or am I drinking the thing that ends it? When rivers failed to deliver, or when traveling far from one, early humans turned to other sources. Rainwater, for example, was liquid gold, falling from the sky like a gift that might only come once in weeks. The trick, of course, was catching it. Leaves shaped into makeshift funnels, palms of hands, even crudely shaped pieces of animal skin all became tools in their own right. Whatever it took to collect those precious droplets quickly and store them. And storager, that was a whole other challenge. Early humans didn't exactly have canteens handy. Some anthropologists believe animal bladders or hollowed-out gourds were among the first basic solutions to keeping that water portable. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't clean by modern standards, but it worked. Then there were springs. If you found one in the wild clear, bubbling, emerging fresh from the earth, you'd hit the prehistoric jackpot. Springs were rare but unbeatable sources of clean water. That said, finding one meant knowing the terrain intimately. Cavemen weren't wandering aimlessly. They were studying their environment almost like detectives. Look for greener patches of vegetation. Listen closely for the sound of water trickling under stones. Even the animal tracks could betray the location of a spring, with trails leading directly to the edge of survival. But when surface water wasn't an option, people went below it. Evidence of prehistoric wells shows that humans knew how to dig using antlers, bones, or even sharp rocks to scrape away the earth. One of the oldest wells, found in Cyprus, is thought to be around 500 years old. Imagine digging to save your life, grainy soil sifting out clump by clump, as you took blind faith in the thought that water might be underneath. These wells weren't only acts of desperation but of incredible foresight. You'd make one not just for you but for everyone to come after you. The challenges didn't stop at finding water though. Even when you knew where it was, sometimes getting to it was another story entirely. Rivers could be miles away, pushing the day's first task into a grueling trek under a brutal sun or biting cold. Early humans often carried water in stone jars, animal hide pouches, or simply in their hands-on exhausting trip that drained the body as much as it could replenish it. And what if the riverbed suddenly ran dry? Droughts weren't kind to prehistoric humans. No rainfall meant vegetation withered, prey moved elsewhere, and water sources dried into cracked paths of useless dirt. Without backup plans and strategies, the clan would have to make a tough choice: stay and gamble with dehydration, or move and gamble with the unknown. Speaking of the unknown, settling near water came with another set of risks. Sure, rivers and lakes provided hydration and resources. The fish alone could make it worth the trouble, but big predators knew that too. A pride of lions, a lurking crocodile, even large carnivorous birds all recognized waterholes as feeding zones. Getting too close in the wrong conditions could turn fetching water into a game of life or death hide and seek. So, if possible, the clan would send the sharp-eyed scouts, the younger, faster, or smarter members who could slip in and out before becoming the prey themselves. And things didn't stop at external dangers. Sometimes, the danger was invisible, lurking in the water itself. Contaminated water not only brought immediate trouble, like diarrhea and dehydration, but sometimes introduced longer-term health issues. Back then, nobody could see the bacteria swimming in the stream, but one bad sip could still have repercussions across an entire group. The weakest members' children, pregnant women, anyone recovering from injury would suffer the most. If disease spread, you'd be looking at more than just lost lives. You'd be looking at a weakened group, less able to hunt, forage, or defend their territory. What's incredible, though, is how resourceful these early humans were in the face of scarcity. Migration was a huge part of their strategy. When one area's water supply started to dry up, the group didn't sit around helplessly. They packed up and moved on. It sounds drastic to modern ears, but for them, it was often the only logical choice. The evidence of human migration patterns shows just how far groups were willing to go to follow water. The Sahara Desert, which is now one of the driest places on Earth, was once covered with rivers and lakes thousands of years ago. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient tools and settlements in these places, left behind when the water evaporated, and the people moved on. But migration wasn't just about survival, it was about anticipation. The more humans learned their environment, the better they got at predicting its rhythms. Certain plants, for example, only thrived where underground water existed. Animals like birds often hovered close to water sources. These keen observations turned early humans into something closer to scientists than scavengers, studying the patterns around them and using that knowledge to decide where to go next. So, what happened when water truly ran out? The simple answer is, people died. But more often than not, groups found ways to adapt before that breaking point. Some relied on unconventional sources. Caves, for example, were not only shelters but potential treasure troves of stored rainwater. The cool, stable environment inside a cave often allowed pools of water to linger longer than they would on the surface. Others collected dew in the mornings, using leaves or strips of hide to gently funnel the moisture into something drinkable. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't plentiful, but it was survival. One fascinating clue about prehistoric water use lies in early human settlements near coastlines. While salt water itself wasn't usable, these areas often had access to fresh water in the form of estuaries, tidal pools, or underground streams that emerged closer to the shore. People learned to thrive in these diverse environments, using the proximity to both land and aquatic resources as a way to hedge their bets against the unpredictable nature of freshwater supplies elsewhere. All of this added up to a precarious balance. Some days, water was abundant, and the clan could focus on other task shunting, tool-making, socializing around the fire. On other days, it dominated everything. If you've ever gone without water for any amount of time, you know how quickly thirst takes over. Your mouth dries, your skin feels tight, and your thoughts slow into a kind of haze. Cavemen didn't have the luxury of waiting too long before finding it. Every effort to collect, store, and safeguard water wasn't just practical, it was meticulous planning for the future. The relationship between early humans and water reminds us just how resourceful they were in the face of challenges we rarely think about today. Water wasn't guaranteed, it was a constant pursuit. It shaped where people lived, how they moved, and even the tools and strategies they developed along the way. And while survival often boiled down to the strength of an individual, it was the power of the group, the teamwork, the shared knowledge that brought everyone through these tests. Working together was more than just a convenience, it was everything. Without the cooperation of the clan, survival would have been all but impossible. But what did these groups look like? How did they function? If daily life revolved around drinking, eating, and staying alive, how did community dynamics come into play as they tackled these challenges side by side? Let's uncover what it meant to depend on others when no one could make it alone. Alone, you wouldn't stand a chance out here. The predators are faster than you, stronger than you, and their claws make your flint knife look like a toy. Even the landscape itself is unruly, plenty of ways to slip, twist an ankle, and become someone's dinner. But together, that's where humans found their edge. Community wasn't just a way to share resources, it was a survival tool in its own right, just as essential as fire or a sharp spear. The moment early humans started grouping together, something incredible began to take shape. Strength in numbers. Picture this. Your clan is small, maybe 20 or so people, give or take a few depending on the time of year. You're gathered around a fire that throws wild shadows onto the rocks, and even in the glow, you can feel the tenuous balance holding everything together. You all rely on each other, and it's not just about sharing food or tools, it's about protection, knowledge, and a sense of belonging. The bonds you form with the people around you aren't just social niceties, they're the glue keeping you alive. But living in close quarters isn't exactly peaceful. Think about 20 people crammed into a cave or huddled inside a fragile hut, each one with their own quirks, frustrations, and moments of pettiness. If someone hoards a little too much food, if someone's firewood collection isn't up to snuff, or if tempers flare after a failed hunt, conflict can feel just as much of a threat as the saber-toothed cat outside. You can almost imagine the glares exchanged over portions of cooked meat, the sharp words that, though nobody knows it, yet lay the groundwork for the first human arguments. This is where cooperation became an evolutionary advantage. Somewhere along the way, humans figured out that working together, despite the inevitable drama, was worth it. Roles within the clan weren't assigned with a formal rota or list. Instead, they emerged naturally. The strongest and fastest among you probably focused on hunting, tracking prey, setting traps, coordinating ambushes with others. Those with a keen eye and careful hands took on gathering, plucking berries or roots from the forest with an instinctive understanding of what would feed the group without poisoning it. Others stayed behind at the shelter, tending to the fire, crafting tools, and protecting the vulnerable, the elderly, the injured, the very young. These roles weren't rigid, they shifted with the needs of the group. If a skilled hunter twisted his ankle, he might spend months chipping flint into spearheads until he could run again. A young child might learn to scrape hides alongside their parents, knowing full well the day would come when they'd graduate to bigger responsibilities. The survival of the clan depended not just on physical strength or speed, but on forming a kind of flexible, living system, our system built around collaboration. We actually see evidence of this in the archaeological record. Shared tools and communal fire pits point to groups living and working alongside one another for long stretches of time. Burial sites, too, tell a fascinating story. Take the Shanidar cave in modern-day Iraq, where skeletons dating back nearly 50 years have been found. One particular burial stands out: a man who suffered from severe injuries that would have left him partially blinded and unable to fend for himself. Yet, he survived for years after these injuries, a clear sign that the group cared for him, fed him, and kept him safe. In a world this harsh, that kind of mutual care couldn't have been easy. But it demonstrates something profound. Humans weren't just survivors, they were nurturers. Imagine what that must have looked like. Someone waking up early to bring water to an elder who couldn't travel to the river. A group of hunters carrying a wounded comrade back to the shelter, their hands bloodied from both the kill and the injuries they're tending to. These moments of care weren't grand gestures, but they were critical. They weren't just keeping individuals alive, they were cementing bonds that held the community together. Of course, it wasn't all altruism. There's an undeniable practicality here. Everyone pulling their weight meant the difference between life and death for the whole group. If someone slacked off, if someone took more resources than they contributed, it was only a matter of time before tensions broke out. The need to share fairly became one of those invisible rules that guided early communities. You can almost picture someone hovering over the remains of a roasted boar, their face carefully neutral but their hands subtly blocking anyone from taking too large a share. Equality wasn't just an ideal, it was survival strategy. But for every moment of conflict, there were also moments of incredible unity. Think about the sheer logistics it took to organize a group hunt. Tracking a wild beast across miles of rugged terrain, predicting its movements, and coordinating an ambush. That didn't happen by accident. Early humans might not have had language the way we do now, no full sentences or complex words, but they understood each other through gestures, sounds, even the smallest shifts in tone. Communication, even in this raw form, was another tool they added to their survival arsenal. Some of the earliest evidence of group hunts comes from butchering sites, places where dozens of tool marks on animal bones suggest the work of an entire clan processing a single carcass. Without refrigeration or even pottery to store meat, every kill had to be shared and consumed quickly. You can picture it. Groups huddled around an animal's remains, flint knives flashing as they carved away slabs of meat, sinew, and fat. The hunters would have been celebrated maybe with an extra bite or two of roasted liver. These moments, fleeting as they were, undoubtedly brought groups closer together. After all, nothing bonds people quite like a full belly and the shared thrill of escaping hunger for another day. But here's the thing. Caveman communities didn't just cooperate because they had to. Over time, they began to rely on each other in ways that went beyond the physical needs of the moment. Shared fire pits weren't just about warmth, they became gathering places. Around the fire is where stories were told, tools were crafted, and laughter broke the tension of a dangerous existence. Those painted images on cave walls, they weren't just idle doodles. They were likely tied to rituals or shared experiences, moments where the clan came together to reflect on their world, their successes, and their survival. These gatherings must have felt like the closest thing to safety in an unsafe world, places where the threats lurking beyond the firelight faded into the background, if only briefly. No one will ever know exactly what they said to each other or the thoughts that flickered in their minds. But we know this much. Early humans didn't just survive because of their tools or strength. They survived because they built something bigger than themselves, a community. The seeds planted around those campfires are still with us today. The same cooperation that helped a clan take down a mammoth now fuels teams of scientists launching rockets or doctors performing surgeries. If you trace it all back, the connections we rely on today, friends, families, social networks, all began with those first clans who saw the value in standing together rather than fleeing alone. They didn't just learn how to live, they learned how to live together. But this unity came at a cost. Relying on others didn't just bring strength, it brought vulnerability to the kind of dangers no one wanted to face. Because even as your clan worked as one, there were constant threats trying to tear that unity apart. Predators didn't stop hunting just because you were sitting in a group. Rival clans, too, always lurked at the edges of your territory, waiting for an opportunity. And the real question wasn't if danger would come, it was how you'd protect yourself and your community when it did. Let's explore just how familiar danger was in a world where survival meant always looking over your shoulder. You don't wake up in this world without a lingering sense of unease. There's no such thing as a safe day. Every rustle, every shadow, every faint sound carries the potential for disaster. Before you even step out of the cave, you've already replayed in your mind the threats waiting just beyond the mouth of your shelter. Are there claw marks in the dirt this morning? Has the scent of the fire faded enough for an animal to risk strolling in? Or worse, is another group over, humans watching your group from the distance, wondering if today might be the day they take what's yours? Survival was never about relaxation. It was about vigilance, constant, exhausting vigilance. Let's start with the obvious enemies first, predators. Out there, predators reigned supreme, and at night, the playing field wasn't just tilted in their favor, it was practically vertical. Saber-toothed cats, with their dagger-like fangs and powerful bodies, weren't myths from some Ice Age movie. They were real, terrifyingly real. Imagine seeing one step out of the underbrush, its enormous teeth glinting faintly as its eyes locked on you. You've got a spear, maybe just a sharpened stick, and your best defense is running, hiding. Your brain flips through options, but none of them feel good. Then there were bears, wolves, and hyenas, each one deadly in a different way. Hyenas didn't just kill, they hunted in groups, the animal kingdom's tag team, each one yipping and howling to wear you down. They didn't have to outsmart you, they just had to outlast you. Predators weren't just a threat to your body, they were a threat to the morale of the entire group. Lose one hunter to an ambush, and suddenly everyone feels less safe, less willing to venture out. And speaking of ambushes, predators weren't always the four-legged kind. Rival clans posed just as much danger. The prehistoric world wasn't empty space waiting for you to claim it. It was full of others, all with their own fires, their own shelters, and their own desperate need for resources. If your territory overlapped with theirs, conflict was almost inevitable. Disputes might start small, stolen food, encroachment onto a hunting ground. But they could escalate quickly, and the results weren't pretty. Archaeological evidence makes that clear. Some of the oldest human skeletons tell grim tales. One famous set of remains, found in the Nataruk region of modern Kenya, paints a chilling picture of early violence. The bones dated to around 10,000 years ago show injuries inflicted by sharpened weapons and blunt trauma. The victims were killed in what looks eerily like a premeditated attack. Cracked skulls, shattered ribs, even marks from club sits, not a random encounter with nature. This was one group wiping out another, and while it's shocking to imagine, it makes sense. Resources were scarce, and in a harsh competitive environment, cooperation between groups wasn't exactly on the menu. Your clan's survival might mean another's demise. So how did humans defend themselves in the face of all this? The first step, and arguably the most important, was fire. Fire wasn't just warmth or light, it was a weapon. Predators feared it instinctively, their eyes reflecting in the dancing flames, too cautious to get close. At night, keeping the fire going was more than a chore, was a lifeline. Eyes flicked to it constantly, watching for signs that it was fading, sparks dwindling down to embers. If it happened, you'd feel the tension ripple through the group. It wasn't just the cold creeping closer, it was the dark, and everything that came with it. But fire couldn't solve everything. That's where tools came in. Spears, clubs, and throwing sticks weren't just for hunting. They became an extension of your ability to defend yourself. Picture the scenario. You're crouched in the shadows near your shelter as a rival group approaches. They want your food, your tools, maybe even your land. Your group, huddled together, tightens their grip on the few weapons they have: sharp-edged flint knives, maybe a spear tipped with bone or stone. There's a tense silence, broken only by the crackle of fire and low, guttural shouting. When violence erupts, it's as much chaos as strategy. Fossil evidence of broken skulls, fractured bones, and injuries that could only come from a fight show that these conflicts weren't rare, nor were they merciful. Group tactics were critical. Even highly coordinated predators like wolves couldn't match the complexity of human planning. Lookouts stood ready at the perimeter of the campsite, while others worked together to construct crude defenses: stacked branches, sharpened stakes, even simple rock walls. If you didn't have the manpower to fight, you'd outthink them instead. Diversions, ambushes, even feints to make your group seem larger or stronger were all part of the playbook. These strategies didn't just help fend off attacks, they forged a deep sense of camaraderie within clans. Every battle won, every predator chased away, reinforced the value of sticking together. Even with these defenses, not everyone made it out of these daily gambles unscathed. Animal attacks were horrifically common. Bone evidence shows injuries that are hard to forget. One set of remains, dating back over 100 years, includes a femur with deep gaseous teeth marks left behind by a large carnivore. The individual survived the attack but carried those scars, a visible reminder of how thin the line between life and death truly was. And if a predator dragged you off, the group might scramble to save you, but they had to calculate the risk as coldly as they could. One life versus many. Sometimes, survival meant making unimaginably difficult choices. These threats weren't just obstacles. They reshaped how humans lived, worked, and thought. Over time, the constant need to watch, adapt, and strategize sharpened our species in ways few other animals could match. Just think about it. Every step toward learning to defend ourselves, every innovation in tools, every refinement in group tactics, it all came from firelight nights spent facing off against eyes gleaming in the dark. Patterns started to emerge. By observing predators, early humans developed a deeper understanding of animal behavior, knowing when to expect an attack, how to read tracks, where to set traps. Watching rival clans taught humans how to negotiate territory, how to gauge when violence couldn't be avoided, and perhaps even how to send subtle warnings that said, "Stay back, this is ours." These weren't written rules. They were carved into our DNA through trial, error, and no shortage of blood. So, if danger shaped them, did it make them stronger? The evidence says yes. The challenges of daily life pushed early humans to innovate like no other species. By the time Homo sapiens entered the picture, the defensive strategies of our ancestors had laid the groundwork for everything from architecture to agriculture. Those crude shelters with brambles for walls, they'd evolve into reinforced structures. Those tiny clans huddled around fires, they'd grow into societies with established borders and rules. But as much as these threats forced humans to adapt and innovate, they came at extraordinary cost. Injuries weren't just setbacks, they could spiral into death sentences. A broken leg, a deep scratch, an infection from a wolf's bite, or even an arrowhead lodged in your arm could cripple you for life. The threats you faced were relentless, but so too was the primal drive to survive even when survival came with lasting pain. That, perhaps more than anything, defined the day-to-day life of early humans, the willingness to confront danger and push through it, no matter how heavy the odds. And when those injuries inevitably came, how did they handle them? They didn't have antibiotics, splints, or even knowledge of germs, but they had resourcefulness, instinct, and each other. Facing injuries and sickness meant relying just as much on the group as you did when staring down a predator. Let's open up that world next, where survival wasn't just about brute strength but about healing, connecting, and outsmarting the odds stacked against you. You're crouched over a fire, sharpening a spearhead when it happens to slip. Your hand jerks at the wrong angle, and the sharp edge of flint slices through your skin. It's small, just a cut, barely enough to notice in the moment, but you stop anyway. You watch as the wound beads with blood, first bright, then dark. It stings, definitely not pleasant, but what comes next? You don't have a bandage. There's no antiseptic, no clean cloth to press against it. You know instinctively that even this tiny wound could spell disaster. Out here, injuries were a constant risk. Prehistoric life rarely waited for you to rest and recover. Hunting trips left you battered, crafting tools wore down your hands, and even something as simple as hauling water could leave scratches and blisters. And if you think the dangers stopped there, they didn't. A small injury could escalate quickly. The cut from that spearhead wouldn't just sting for a few days, it could turn red, swell, and throb, eventually filling with pus. At its worst, without modern medicine, a basic infection could take your life. The stakes weren't just high, they were relentless. So, what did you do in a world without hospitals or doctors? Healing was a mix of desperation, instinct, and ingenuity. You'd start with the most immediate problems, stopping bleeding, warding off infection, and hoping the wound wouldn't leave you unable to work or hunt. Early humans didn't have a word for antiseptic, but they had knowledge passed down through generations. Plants were the first aid kit of the prehistoric world. Certain leaves or roots were chewed, crushed, or brewed into rudimentary poultices. For example, some wild plants like yarrow are believed to have been used to staunch bleeding when applied directly to wounds. It's the kind of trial and error knowledge that didn't come cheap. Someone, somewhere, had figured it out the hard way. Archaeological evidence suggests that plant-based medicine wasn't just random guesswork, it was surprisingly strategic. Traces of medicinal plants have been found in ancient burial sites. In Shanidar Caves, the same place that provided evidence of caregiving pollen grains from chamomile, yarrow, and other known medicinal plants were discovered around the remains of a Neanderthal man. It wasn't a coincidence. His clan likely placed these plants there intentionally, perhaps as part of a burial ritual or as a final attempt to ease his suffering. These were plants with specific UZ anti-inflammatory properties, pain relief, or even mild disinfectant qualities. It tells us that even Neanderthals, often written off as brutish, had an intimate understanding of the natural pharmacy around them. But what about injuries that didn't heal so neatly? Imagine breaking a bone while out hunting. There's no clinic, no splint, no painkillers to ease the misery. A broken leg could leave you immobilized for weeks, unable to move with the group, let alone contribute. Surprisingly, though, early humans didn't just leave you to die. Evidence of healed fractures in ancient skeletons suggests that clans took extraordinary measures to care for their injured. Bones show signs of resetting, crude but effective splints, and long periods of healing. For someone to survive a broken leg, others would have had to bring them food, water, and protectional at a time when everyone was already stretched thin. These weren't just acts of kindness. They were investments in survival. Every member of the group mattered, and losing one could weaken the whole. And then there was pain. Today, we pop ibuprofen for even mild discomfort, but imagine dealing with constant, unfiltered pain. If you were lucky, your group might know of a root or leaf that could at least dull the edge. Willow bark, for instance, contains salicin, which is chemically similar to modern aspirin. Some researchers believe early humans may have chewed it to relieve pain. Of course, you wouldn't know why. It worked. You'd just know it helped, and that was enough. Other remedies were more about distraction chanting, singing, or focusing on something tactile, like the feel of a fire's warmth or the rhythm of crafting tools. But let's face it, not all injuries were treatable. Some wounds, deep cuts, animal bites, or infections that spread had grim outcomes. Death wasn't distant. It was close, familiar, and constant. Yet even in these moments, humans refused to give up entirely. Consider trepanation, one of the earliest forms of surgery. If you're unfamiliar, trepanation involves drilling or scraping a hole into the skull. It sounds barbaric today, but the evidence suggests it was done intentionally and, shockingly, sometimes successfully. Skulls from as far back as 8,000 years ago show clear signs of this practice, with smooth edges indicating that the patients survived long enough for the bone to heal. Why do it? Maybe to release pressure after a head injury, or perhaps for ritual reasons, but whatever the motivation, it's staggering to think about. The tools were probably basic sharp stones used with painstaking carand. The procedure would have been excruciating. But it happened, and some of those patients lived to tell about ITER, at least to keep surviving a while longer. Injuries weren't the only threats, of course. Illnesses had their own cruel timetable. Without an understanding of germs, infections, fevers and diseases, seemed more like curses than medical problems. Cold weather brought respiratory infections, hot climates bred parasites, and contaminated water carried diseases that could wreak havoc. The worst part? There was no roadmap for treatment. You'd rely on observation and memory. If someone drank from a certain stream and got sick, you avoided it. If a specific plant caused nausea, you marked it mentally as dangerous. Survival wasn't just physical. It required constant learning and adapting, sometimes at the expense of an individual's life. But no matter how grim things became, the group rarely abandoned their own. Think back to that injured hunter with the broken leg or the elder suffering from fever. These people couldn't contribute directly in the moment, but they still carried value in other ways. Maybe the hunter could teach others how to set traps or identify animal tracks. Maybe the elder had a lifetime of knowledge about plants, fire-making, or reading the weather. In these cases, the group's willingness to care for the sick or injured wasn't just about compassion. It was a recognition that survival wasn't just about brute strength, it was about brains, experience, and the bonds that held the community together. Every scratch healed, every bone reset, and every illness endured taught early humans a lesson about survival. These lessons weren't just personal, they were shared through stories, gestures, and what might have been the earliest forms of teaching. It's this dedication to learning and adapting that laid the groundwork for modern medicine. Those plants crushed into poultices became the ancestors of today's pharmaceuticals. The trials of setting bones honed the techniques that later became surgery. Even trepanation, brutal as it sounds, represents the first steps toward understanding and intervening in the human body's processes. In some ways, every band-aid and bottle of antibiotics today traces back to the resourcefulness of those early days. We've carried the lessons forward, building on the bravery and grit of people who faced sickness with nothing but raw determination and the tools around them. And through it all, the importance of human connection remained constant. Whether it was holding someone's hand during a fever or carrying an injured group member on your back, survival didn't happen alone. But even as they healed each other, early humans knew they couldn't always count on avoiding harm. Part of survival meant prevention, and that's where another critical invention came into play. The first clothes weren't about fashion, they were about protection armor against nature's relentless assault. How did these early humans figure out how to dress for survival, stitching together scraps of material to stand between themselves and the environment? Let's dive into that next. Clothes weren't just about covering up, they were survival, plain and simple. Forget any thoughts about style or individuality. Out here, your makeshift garments were the only thing standing between you and the punishing forces of nature. Freezing winds, torrential rain, and merciless sun didn't care about your comfort. Without protection, exposure could kill you long before hunger or predators had a chance. In a world where every day could turn into a life or death fight against the elements, clothes weren't optional, they were armor. The need for clothing came with the rhythm of the seasons and the challenges that each brought with them. A biting winter wind wasn't just cold. It clawed at your skin, sapping your energy and making it harder to think clearly, let alone act. Rain didn't simply soak into your body, it drained your heat, leaving you shivering in a dangerous spiral toward hypothermia. Then there was the sun, especially in hotter climates, where endless exposure could scorch your skin or sap your strength. In other words, no matter where you lived, the environment was always trying to kill you. And early humans, lacking fur or feathers, had to improvise or suffer the consequences. The first clothing wasn't sophisticated, but it got the job done. Animal skins played a primary role, thick, insulating, and relatively easy to acquire once you got past the hard part of hunting the animal itself. Imagine the scene. After a successful hunt, you'd gather the kill, skin the carcass, and carefully strip away as much usable material as possible. These hides would then need hours, sometimes days, of preparation to make them even remotely wearable. Raw animal hide isn't exactly soft. It's stiff, tough, and, let's be honest, smelly. To soften it, members of the clan would scrape the hide with stone tools, removing extra fat and flesh. Once cleaned, they'd rub in animal brainsas part of the tanning process. Odd as it sounds, this was one of the most effective ways to make leather flexible and ready for use. Not glamorous, but incredibly practical. These roughly prepared hides became everything. Cloaks to wrap around your body, strips tied around your feet, and crude belts or thongs to secure tools. Cold weather brought the use of furs, thick and luxurious with insulating layers of trapped air. Furs weren't just thrown over the shoulders willy-nilly. Over time, people learned to stitch pieces together, combining materials to cover more of the body. It made sense. The more surface you shielded, the less heat you lost. Life wasn't about versatility in fashion, it was about survival through innovation. Here's where tools made all the difference. Needles, some of the earliest recovered by archaeologists, weren't fancy stainless steel pins, but fragments of animal bone shaved down to delicate points. Eyelets were carved into one end, and strips of sinew or animal gut served as thread. The process of stitching two hides together with these crude tools wasn't gentle or easy. It required patience, steady hands, and enough skill to pull the thread through without tearing the material apart. But the payoff was massive. Proper garments that stayed together and provided true coverage. The oldest known needle, found in Siberia, dates back about 50 years and offers tangible proof of just how long humans have been refining this craft. And it wasn't just about animals. Plant fibers also came into play, especially in regions where hide wasn't as abundant. Early humans discovered that materials like grasses, nettles, or tree bark could be pounded down, softened, and twisted into threads. These weren't as strong or warm as leather, but they offered a surprising amount of versatility. Fiber weaving likely spawned from methods originally used to create baskets or nets, applying the same principles to produce crude coverings. Over time, perhaps inspired by trial, error, and sheer necessity, plant materials became an additional resource in humanity's evolving wardrobe. But let's not romanticize it too much. The process of making clothing was punishing work. Every step from hunting to skinning to stitching was labor-intensive and time-consuming. And even when you succeeded in creating a garment, it wasn't necessarily comfortable. Imagine wrapping unlined leather around your skin, stiff with seams that rubbed against your body as you moved. It wasn't soft. It wasn't pretty. And yet, it was the only thing standing between you and ice or sunburn or frostbite. At the end of the day, Survival didn't care how itchy your new outfit felt. What's fascinating is how clothing actually said something about the people who made it. Early humans weren't just flinging animal pelts around their shoulders and calling it a day. The effort they put into preparing and tailoring garments reflects ingenuity and planning. Some archaeological evidence even points to decorative touches on items like belts or leather ties, where early humans might have carved small patterns or dyed materials with natural pigments. Why bother, you ask, when survival was already so difficult? Maybe it was practical, marking ownership. Maybe it was spiritual, tied to the animal's symbolism. Or maybe, just maybe, it was an early flare of individuality, a way to say, "This is mine." These tiny, thoughtful additions remind us that humans weren't just surviving. They were expressing themselves in small, quiet ways. Over time, clothing evolved right alongside humanity itself. As humans migrated out of Africa into colder climates, their garments adjusted to meet new challenges. In Europe, where icy winds cut with particular sharpness, layered furs and cloaks became the standard. In warmer regions, skins were scraped thinner and designs opened up to allow greater movement and breathability. The staggering adaptability of early humans didn't just stop at finding food or making tools. It extended to what they wore, proof of an ever-deepening understanding of their environment and how to thrive within it. And clothing accomplished more than basic protection from the elements. It also formed a literal barrier between humans and the environment in other ways. Thick, layered garments shielded skin against scratches from thorns or sharp rocks, acting almost like a suit of armor during foraging trips or hunts. Insects, too, likely influenced early clothing strategies. Mosquitoes, biting flies, and ticks could ruin a person's day or worse, spread disease. Covering exposed skin became less of a luxury and more of a necessity for long-term survival. Fast forward tens of thousands of years, and you can see the seeds of something enormous taking root. Clothing didn't just protect, it helped humans expand into environments they would have otherwise avoided. It turned high mountain ranges, dense forests, and icy tundras into habitable territories, creating opportunities for different tools, diets, and even settlements to emerge. A well-insulated cloak wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was the key to mobility. It gave humans the ability to move, adapt, and thrive beyond the boundaries of where nature dictated they ought to stay. So, what do these first garments really tell us about the people who made them? In a way, they symbolize everything that early humans were: resilient, creative, and deeply resourceful. Every scratch of hide against stone, every pull of sinew thread through fur, and every carefully layered stitch showed not just a desire to survive, it showed an ability to think ahead, to innovate in ways far beyond the simplicity of need. These crude, early garments may seem primitive now, but they paved the way for an understanding of textiles, design, and adaptive technology that bled into every part of human progress. And as they stitched, scraped, and bundled themselves against the cold, early humans probably didn't have any idea what they were setting in motion. These small, quiet acts of survival-airing hides, sewing with bone needles, softening fibers did more than just keep them alive. They set the stage for all the advancements that followed. Every discovery built on these small, essential skills, eventually leading humanity toward settlements, agriculture, even trade. That's the thing about inventions like these. They're rarely about the inventions themselves. They're about the ripple effects. These rough garments, tied together with care and brain power, weren't just simple solutions to immediate problems, they were stepping stones on a much larger journey. And with every tied knot and snug layer, humans took one more step toward making a world where, for once, the elements weren't always in charge. But as far as challenges went, this was just a sliver of the struggle. Clothes could protect your skin, but they couldn't shield you from everything. The dangers of life, both natural and human, lingered like shadows, ever-present and unyielding. Yet for the cavemen, those shadows weren't a limitation. They were a canvas for what came next. What happens when survival becomes more than just scraping by? When we begin to see the subtle, extraordinary shift between surviving and building towards something greater, that story begins where these threads leave off. As you lie back tonight, think about this. Cavemen didn't just scrape by, they built the foundation for everything we call civilization. Every fire they lit, every tool they crafted, every shelter they pieced together wasn't just survival, it was a step forward. Their determination turned raw instinct into ingenuity, transforming an unforgiving world into something they could control just a little. So, as you drift towards sleep, consider their resilience. Those early humans remind us that even in a harsh and uncertain world, creativity and cooperation could push back the darkness. And in many ways, they never stopped shaping the future.